It's really exciting to be here for the 30th anniversary celebration of Social Text, which I think is a journal that has had really a huge impact on the intellectual and political left. I really love the kind of mixed format in the anniversary issue. There's a historical introduction based on the archives for Social Text, essays based on keywords that are relatively free-form, and excerpts from a series of interviews that were done with the founding editors. This collection of materials is very fragmentary, but quite illuminating of different aspects of the life of the journal. Its political intellectual content, the structure of the collective, and the social and affective life of the collective as well. All from different perspectives that the editors haven't tried to unify or rationalize, very much in the spirit of Social Text. So in the same mode, I'd actually like to appropriate that format a little bit and add a few key terms of my own that I drew from reading the text and from my own experience to touch on issues in the life of Social Text and add to what's already been collected here. The first key term that I would add would be the term crisis. When I was recently at the American Studies Association conference in Washington, D.C., my friend and colleague Miranda Joseph said she'd done a word search of the ASA program and found that the absence of both the term crisis and the term economic in the contemporary moment, all the uses of economic were on historical panels. And I noticed this also in relation to the special issue, that reference to the current crises that will surely affect the life of the journal now are not really particularly highlighted. The budget crises now of the universities, which are having a massive effect on budget and budget allocations, not just on salaries and program budgets, but actually there are the restructuring of curricula happening across the country as the budget cuts hit, especially state universities. University presses are beginning to be and will be very much affected by this as well. In addition, the crisis of the publishing industry and the really deep crisis in the profession of journalism, which is all of these are going to affect what kind of journal Social Text can be over the next, say, decade. There is quite a bit of reference within the special issue to the way that the form of the journal has shifted, how it was adopted, how it was debated, how it was supported over a period of time. Starting at the very beginning, Stanley Aronowitz notes that in 1979, he argued that since political parties were not important anymore, that journals needed really to be surrogate political parties, and that the journal would serve as a kind of organizing of bodies and thought in the mode of a political party. But by 1994, Anders Stephenson, did I pronounce that right? Is quoting Fred Jameson as saying that the moment for journals is over. Well, maybe not in 1994. There's a lot in the journal as well about, in the special issue as well, about debates over the move to Duke University Press once the journal went from being independently produced to moving to the press. And there's one I particularly want to read. It's a comment by Sonia Sayers about that. She says that she had opposed that move. What bothered me about centralizing, commercializing, was the fear that that kind of marvelously contentious moment would dissipate into regularity. And without that edginess, without those fierce tugs of war, the journal would become a fine vehicle for new disciplines out there, which is a perfectly good use for any journal, but it wouldn't have that other quality. This concern about the life of the journal and the life of the journal actually being bound up in forms of contention on the journal staff and investment in the risks it took and takes is really continues through the transfer to Duke University Press, and really leads me to another couple of key concepts that I'd like to add to the ones that are here in the special issue. There is an entry on Affect by Anne Pellegrini and Jasbir Kaur. And it's about the intellectual project of affect studies. But I also think there's a lot that circulates in the journal about the affective and emotional life of the collective. And two things that I'd like to point to and add as concepts are both humor and conflict, right? And their importance to the intellectual life and political life of the journal. There's a particularly hilarious anecdote that Toby Miller includes in one of his interviews, under the sign of humor here. A friend of mine in a far-off place once received a rejection letter from the journal that apologized for taking a long time to come to a decision, explaining that the manuscript had been lost when it fell from the back of someone's motorbike. And this was ultimately assumed to be some kind of sign. He loved this letter. It was his favorite rejection of any kind from anywhere. Your manuscript fell off the motorcycle. We thought, that was telling us something. We became a bit more organized, and that was probably a good thing. I know particularly the word probably there. That there are other references throughout the journal. There's a note that Andrew Ross makes in his essay, which is called Production, about the role of joking. The reference is that despite, or perhaps because of the non-sectarian character of the group, there was no end of insider humor about internal purges and about the increasing force of democratic centralism in decision-making. The no end of jokes, I think, is an aspect of life in the collective that is not simply a kind of aside, but really is formative to the kind of journal, the kind of work, the kind of conversations that have taken place over time at Social Text. And I would love to see more said about humor and joking, especially as it goes alongside the other thematic that's really mentioned much more often than joking, and that is the kind of conflict and controversy within and surrounding the journal. I'm really quite glad that there wasn't a lot about the Sokol affair. I think already much too much has been, attention has been accumulated around that. But I was noticing, many references to the importance of and the management of and the way that conflict was a central part of discussion and decision-making at Social Text. Randy Martin uses the wonderful term saying that it was a cauldron. That's just a lovely image, the cauldron, the witch's cauldron, as a place where things are stirred up and heated and the result is possibly magical. But Sonia Sayers, again, with a gift for directness, says, oh, we weren't efficient, we weren't polite. It was very fractious. Which is sort of the summary of a lot of the discussion of what life was like on the journal meetings. The editors note in one of their pieces in the book the importance of the kind of open acknowledgement of interestedness in the journal's discussions. That unlike the peer review process with this pretense of disinterestedness and neutrality, that the open acknowledgement of interestedness and the role of advocacy in decision-making about what would be published was one of the primary strengths and differences that Social Text brings to academic publishing. And then the sort of conflicts within were noted several times by. There's one particularly pointed note by Bruce Robbins in which he said, "There was no yelling or bad feeling, but it's true that I had enormous frustration with some of the people I had to work with." No names. No names listed. Or Toby Miller expressing frustration about decision-making and balance of power. I managed to recruit some papers by people beyond the humanities during my time at the journal, but they were sometimes derided as crude or not up with the literature by others more wedded to textualism, while the idea of expanding to look at the areas I proposed didn't catch on. Obviously some resentment there. And there are references throughout about even though social text is referred to as multidisciplinary, interdisciplinary, and transdisciplinary and postdisciplinary, the persistence of some kinds of conflicts based on broad notions of disciplinarity were nonetheless important and continue to be important, and were important around the life of the journal, and are referenced and discussed to some extent, but not really sort of gathered under that topic or sign. The last topic key concept that I'd like to add to the list of what's in the journal is the keyword circulation. There is a note, at the very back, there's a notation of the extent and nature of circulation, that the paid circulation of the journal is small, less than 1,000, as is true of academic journals and of academic publications in general. Press runs run to now about 1,000 in most academic publishing. Although, the circulation to non-buyers is hard to assess, right? The circulation through libraries of photocopying and hand-to-hand, the numbers in no way capture the forms and the ways that social text circulated in and throughout both academia and beyond. So the question does remain, who reads social text? And that would really be something I'd love to know more about. But floating over that is the big digital question, which is raised several times in the discussions, the essays and interviews in the journal, that because of the limits and costs of paper circulation, and also because of the temporality of print publication, that it takes such a long time from the time you turn in an article or an essay or contribution until it can appear in print in the journal, that both cost and temporality raise questions about moving in the direction of more instant and less costly internet publication. There's one point where Sonia Sayers notes that blogs is about as useful as anything. Lots of offhand comments about what the impact of the probability of of moving to digital formats is going to be, and we'll hear soon from Tavi Nyong'o about a social text website and what might be happening with that. But actually, the question about circulation and the big digital question sort of brings me full circle back to the beginning, which is under the sign of crisis. What will happen with budget cuts and university restructuring, and with the crisis in academic publishing and publishing in general, and in journalism specifically. How will social text reinvent itself once again in this economic climate, in this political climate, in this sort of shifting series of overlapping crises, to maintain its continuing reinvention of itself as a site for visionary intellectual activism.